The morning my daughter-in-law arrived with 9 suitcases and announced that the guest house was theirs now, I had already been awake for 2 hours. Not from nerves, from the kind of stillness that settles over a man who has spent his whole life building things carefully and can recognize when something is about to be taken from him. She did not know I recognized it. That was her first mistake. My name is Vernon. I am 73 years old. For most of my adult life, I ran a concrete and construction company along Florida's Gulf Coast that I had started with 1 mixer, 2 employees, and no backup plan. 31 years later, a real estate development group out of Atlanta bought it for $23 million, and I retired to a waterfront home in Naples that I paid for in cash on the day of closing. I had planned to spend those retirement years listening to the Gulf and finishing projects I had postponed for decades. My wife, Carolyn, had always wanted a garden on the south side of the property. She never got to plant it because she passed from a heart condition 14 months before I closed on the house. I planted it for her anyway, though I have never been much of a gardener, and half of it died in the first summer. My son Raymond had not spoken to me in 17 years. Not at Christmas, not at Carolyn's funeral, not on the day I signed the sale documents. For 17 years, there had been nothing but occasional brief text messages, and the specific kind of silence that tells you someone has chosen their absence on purpose. His wife, Deanna, was the reason. I cannot tell you every detail of what she had whispered to him over those years, because I was not in the room. But I know what the result looked like. A son who stopped calling, stopped visiting, and eventually stopped sending even the brief texts. By the time I moved to Naples, I had accepted that I would likely grow old and die without repairing that relationship. Then the sale of my company appeared in the business section of a regional paper. 10 days later, my doorbell rang at 9 in the morning. Raymond stood on my porch with dark circles under his eyes and the look of a man who had not slept properly in weeks. Behind him, Deanna smiled the way people smile when they have decided they are already inside. And behind her, leaning against the doorframe with one hand pressed to her stomach and her face the color of old paper, stood my granddaughter. Her name was Hadley. She was 16 years old. I had met her 4 times in her entire life. "Pop," Deanna said warmly, brushing past me with the ease of someone entering a hotel room they had reserved in advance. "The guest house is ours, right? I figured we would get settled while you and Raymond catch up." I looked at Raymond. He looked at the welcome mat. 17 years, and my son could not lift his eyes to meet mine. I stepped into Deanna's path before she reached the hallway. "You are not moving into this house," I said. "Take the luggage back to the car." She stopped. The warmth in her expression did not disappear. It simply adjusted, the way a salesperson adjusts when the first approach does not close the deal. "Oh, Pop, do not be dramatic. We are family. Family does not turn family away." Then she reached behind her and pulled Hadley forward by the elbow. That was when I saw how bad it really was. Up close, Hadley looked worse than pale. Her wrists were thin in a way that suggested months rather than days. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes, and the thing that cut through every other observation was the way she kept glancing toward the driveway, and then toward the hallway, measuring the distance to every exit. That is not what a tired teenager does. That is what a person does when they have learned that exits matter. "She is not well," Deanna said pleasantly. "You would not put a sick child back in the car." She was right that I would not. But I want to be precise about what happened in that moment, because it mattered later. I did not let them in because Deanna had outmaneuvered me. I let them in because Hadley was standing in my doorway and she whispered, barely audible over the sound of the Gulf wind. 2 words. "Hey, Grandpa." She had never called me that before. She had barely spoken to me the few times we had been in the same room. And something in those 2 words told me that she needed me to keep her mother close for reasons I did not yet understand. "The girl comes inside," I said. "You 2 stay until I hear the truth." Raymond reached for a suitcase. I did not stop him. Hadley swayed slightly, one hand finding the doorframe, and I stepped aside. Deanna entered without hesitation, pulling the first suitcase across my tile like she was moving furniture she owned. She ran 2 fingers along the arm of my leather sofa, examined the stitching, then looked toward the staircase. "Real leather?" she said. "You must have gotten lucky with some land deal." I said nothing. I watched Hadley lower herself carefully onto the edge of a chair near the luggage. When Deanna glanced at her, Hadley immediately straightened her posture, the way someone straightens when they have learned that appearing weak carries a cost. "You have 30 minutes, I told Deanna. "Tell me where you have been for 17 years, why you are here now, and what you actually want." She sat on my sofa and crossed her legs. "We are all you have, Pop. You are old, alone, and frightened of dying in this empty house. We came to help." Raymond stared at the floor. Hadley closed her eyes. And I understood that Deanna believed loneliness had made me soft enough to handle. She was not entirely wrong about the loneliness. She was completely wrong about what it had done to me. My hand was already around the phone in my pocket, and I was close to calling the sheriff when Hadley swayed in the chair. Not dramatically. Just a small, quiet loss of balance that she caught before anyone else noticed. Anyone except me. I made a decision. "One night," I said. "Hadley needs rest. Nobody goes back in the car tonight. But tomorrow morning I need to understand what is actually happening here." Deanna's smile widened slowly, the way it does when someone believes they have already won and are simply waiting for the other person to finish pretending otherwise. "See, I knew you would remember what family means." I looked at her steadily. "My house, my rules. You do not give orders to my staff. You do not enter my study. You do not make decisions about this property. Break one of those, and you leave." Raymond nodded at the floor. Deanna waved her hand toward the luggage. "Raymond, get those upstairs." As they moved past me, Hadley paused and looked back over her shoulder. The fear in her eyes was still there, but beneath it was something else. Something that looked like a warning she had not yet found the words for. I gave them the guest suite and locked my bedroom door that night. I placed my security monitor on the nightstand beside the photograph of Carolyn I kept there and watched the camera feeds. Just after midnight, Deanna appeared in the hallway. She stopped outside my study, tested the handle with 2 fingers, then crouched close to the keyhole. A moment later, Raymond joined her. I turned up the monitor volume. "He is slipping," she whispered. "Did you see how his hands shook at dinner? Give me 1 week and I will have him signing power of attorney papers." Raymond looked toward my door. "What if he refuses?" "He will not. He is lonely and desperate to keep us here. We tell him the papers are just for protection. Once he signs, we have control over the house, the accounts, everything." My son said nothing. Deanna continued. "By next Sunday, this place belongs to us." I sat in the dark and listened to a woman I had met fewer than a dozen times in my life plan to steal the rest of it. I wanted to walk into that hallway and end everything right then. Instead, I turned down the monitor volume, lay back against the pillow, and decided that if Deanna wanted a frightened old man, I would give her the most convincing one she had ever seen. I came downstairs the next morning to find my kitchen looking like a diner after a lunch rush. Dishes covered the island, a coffee ring had soaked into the grout near the sink, and my housekeeper, Rosa, stood at the stove with her eyes bright with the particular kind of anger that kind people feel when they have been treated without any respect whatsoever. Deanna was seated at my kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. "These eggs are cold," she said, and snapped her fingers in Rosa's direction. "Make them again." Rosa flinched. I walked between them and said quietly, "Go home for the morning, Rosa. I will handle this." After she left through the side door, I turned to Deanna. "We do not snap at people in this house." She barely glanced up. "If you do not manage your staff properly, they become careless. That is probably why it took you so long to accomplish anything." Raymond kept eating. Hadley sat across from him, staring at a piece of dry toast she had not touched. Deanna looked toward the window. "That live oak is blocking the water view. Raymond can take it down after lunch. Do you keep a chainsaw in the garage?" They had been inside my home less than 18 hours, and she was already redirecting my employees, planning changes to my property, and speaking about my possessions as though I were a guest in my own house. I carried my coffee out to the dock before my expression gave anything away. Deanna believed I was poor, isolated, and losing my grip. By noon, I intended to make her believe something even more useful. I intended to make her believe I was about to lose everything. I called Bo Radford, the foreman who had worked beside me for 22 years, from the far end of the dock where the wind carried my voice toward the water and away from the house. "They showed up," I said. Bo went quiet. He knew exactly who I meant. "I need a favor. 5 minutes from now, call me back. Tell me the bank has frozen my accounts and is calling in the loan on this house." A pause. "Then you are going to play dead so the buzzards come closer. That is the idea." 5 minutes later, the phone rang while I was walking back through the living room. I answered it loud enough to fill every room on the ground floor. "What do you mean the accounts are frozen? Bo, I just closed on this property. I cannot lose the house this fast." I pressed a hand against my forehead. I let my voice break. Deanna came in from the kitchen so quickly she nearly walked into me. Raymond followed, moving slowly, and Hadley appeared in the doorway behind them both. I lowered the phone. "The bank gave me 6 days," I said. "Maybe 7. Raymond sat down heavily and covered his face. Deanna did not look frightened. Her eyes moved across the room in a single practice sweep. Furniture, artwork, the cars visible through the window, the way an assessor moves through a property before writing a number down. She was not seeing my disaster. She was calculating what she could take before it disappeared. I let my shoulders fall and shuffled toward the hallway with the gait of a man who has just been told his floor is collapsing beneath him. The moment I turned the corner, I straightened, moved quickly to the linen closet beside the guest suite, and pressed myself against the wall. Their voices came through the adjoining wall without any effort at all. "We should leave," Raymond whispered. "If the bank takes this house, we could get caught in his problems." Deanna answered with a short, sharp sound that was not quite a laugh. "Do not be foolish. He still owns a $4 million property for 6 more days. That is enough time." "Enough time for what?" "To have him sign the deed over to us. If we have power of attorney and claim cognitive decline, we can establish legal control before the bank makes any move. The cars, the jewelry, the artwork. Anything portable can be sold before anyone challenges it." Raymond's voice dropped further. "Dad would never agree to that." "He will agree when he is frightened enough." Then she said something that made the back of my neck go cold. "And if he resists, I brought something along to help him cooperate. A few drops in his tea will make him agreeable without him understanding why. I used the same thing with my mother before we arranged her placement." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "What if something goes wrong? What if he has a reaction?" Deanna did not answer immediately. At his age, under this kind of financial pressure, people deteriorate quickly. I stood very still in that closet. They had not come to rob me. They were prepared to bury me first and collect afterward. I slipped out before the door opened. My mind was moving fast enough that I nearly walked directly into Hadley at the foot of the stairs. She jumped and pressed her backpack against her chest. "Grandpa," she whispered, barely audible, "please do not drink anything Mom gives you." I looked at her carefully. "Tell me why." Her eyes filled, and she checked the hallway before answering. "The blue pills, she crushed them into her mother's tea. Grandma was completely fine before Mom took over her care. Then she became confused and stopped eating, and died in a facility 8 months later. Mom got everything." For a moment, the house felt very still. Hadley grabbed my sleeve with both hands. "They are going to do the same thing to you. And after they are done, they are sending me away. There is a place in Idaho. Mom paid the deposit on Dad's card. They take your phone when you arrive, and you cannot call anyone without supervision." She was trembling hard enough that I could feel it through her fingers. I placed both hands on her shoulders and waited until she looked at me. Nobody is drugging me, I said, and nobody is sending you to Idaho. Mom always finds a way to win. She wins when everyone around her stays afraid, I said. Let me ask you to do something that is going to feel very hard. I led her into the pantry and pulled the door mostly closed. For a few more days, I need you to behave exactly as you have been. Stay quiet. Stay out of her way. Let her believe you are exhausted and frightened and not paying attention. What are you going to do? I am going to make sure that neither of us has to be afraid of her again. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. If she offers you tea or anything you did not make yourself, you find me immediately. If you see the blue pills, do not touch them. Just remember where she puts them. Hadley nodded. And the school in Idaho? She asked. You are not going. She already paid the deposit. Then she wasted her money. That earned a small, exhausted smile. I sent her upstairs, then walked out to the dock with my back to the house and my phone held close to my chest. My first call was to Sandra Whitmore, the attorney who had handled the sale of my company. She was one of the most precise and unshakable people I had ever met, which is exactly why I had chosen her for a transaction worth $23 million. When I finished telling her about the pills, about what I had heard through the closet wall, and about Hadley's warning, she was quiet for long enough that I might have thought the call had dropped. Then she said, Vernon, do not say a single word to them about what you know. Keep every camera in that house running. I am opening an investigation tonight. She called me back 2 hours later. Sit down before I go through this, she said. I lowered myself onto the dock bench. Her investigator had looked into Raymond's financial history. My son was not simply broke and desperate. He was the subject of an active warrant in Mississippi connected to credit card fraud, specifically the kind that targets elderly people. He had been purchasing stolen personal information, opening accounts in the names of people over the age of 70, and draining the available credit before any of them noticed what was happening. Similar cases were open in Tennessee and Alabama. Deanna's name appeared on 2 of the account applications. I sat with that for a moment. I had raised a boy who used to carry stray dogs home and cry when he was told he could not keep them. I was looking at the record of a man I no longer recognized at all. There is more, Sandra said. They owe $340,000 to a private lender named Salvatore Renteria. I knew the name from years in the construction business. Renteria operated a lending company in Tampa. Everybody in that world understood that the money behind it had a different origin than what the paperwork suggested. How long have they been avoiding him? I asked. 4 months, which may explain why they suddenly needed a wealthy relative who lived alone. Every piece clicked into its correct position. They had not come because they missed me or because they wanted to repair anything. Renteria was the real deadline. My money was the only exit they could see. I asked Sandra one question. Can I purchase that debt? She was quiet. You want to buy your son's loan? I want Renteria out of Hadley's life permanently. Sandra explained that the debt was held through a shell company, but the promissory note was a legal instrument that could be purchased. It would cost the full $340,000, and I might never recover $1 of it. I understand that, I said. Do it. By 6 that evening, Sandra had completed the purchase through a trust under my control. Raymond no longer owed Renteria's company anything. His debt now belonged to me. I did not tell him. That evening, I sat at my own dinner table and performed the most useful act of my life. Deanna had arranged a meal and placed a glass of chamomile tea beside my right hand before I even sat down. You should drink that, Pop, she said. It will settle your nerves after everything today. I lifted the glass and smelled it. Beneath the honey, something else. Faint, slightly sharp, the kind of smell that does not belong in tea. Hadley sat directly across from me. Her fingers had gone white around her napkin. I set the glass down. My stomach has been off all afternoon, I said. Water will be enough for tonight. For less than a second, something shifted in Deanna's expression. Then the smile returned, smooth and patient. I can make a fresh cup later when you feel better. That will not be necessary. Raymond kept his eyes on his plate for the entire meal. After dinner, while Deanna was upstairs, I carried the untouched tea into my study, poured it into a clean glass container, sealed it, labeled it with the date and time, and locked it in the small refrigerator behind my desk. Sandra had already told me exactly what to do with it. One of her investigators collected it the following morning, and then I went to work. I understood what Deanna needed to see in order to feel safe enough to move quickly. She needed a man who was deteriorating under pressure, confused, frightened, losing his grip. I gave her that man. I called Raymond by my late brother's name at breakfast. I asked Deanna twice what month it was, then apologized for forgetting. I left a burner running on the stove and stared at it in apparent bafflement when she pointed it out. I shuffled when she was watching and moved the stack of papers on my desk to a different shelf, then pretended not to remember where I had put them. Each mistake made her warmer toward me. She began touching my shoulder when she passed. She lowered her voice when she spoke to me, the careful softness of someone handling something fragile. And whenever she thought I had turned away, she exchanged a glance with Raymond that communicated everything I needed to know about how close she believed they were to finishing. By Friday morning, she believed I was ready to sign. A white sedan arrived just after 9. A lawyer named Gerald Dunmore stepped out carrying a soft-sided briefcase that had seen better years. He spread documents across my dining table with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times in many houses where someone was being managed out of their own life. Power of attorney, emergency medical guardianship, trust documents naming Raymond and Deanna as sole controllers of my estate. The paperwork was thorough. Someone had spent real time preparing it. Just standard protective measures, Gerald said, without looking up from the pages. Given your situation, it makes sense to have these in place. Deanna placed a pen in my hand. Sign right there, Pop. We are doing this for you. I looked at the pen. I looked at the first page. I let my hand lower toward the signature line with the slowness of an old man who is not entirely sure what he is agreeing to, which was exactly what they needed to believe. I let the pen touch the paper. I drew 3 crooked letters of a half-formed signature. Press down a little more, Pop, Deanna said from behind my left shoulder. I started again, then I stopped and looked up. If I sign this, I said slowly, do I still get to live in my house? I made a promise to my wife that I would never leave. Of course you stay, Deanna said too quickly. That is the entire point of this. We are protecting you. Hadley stood near the doorway with a large glass pitcher. She had been there for several minutes, quiet enough that no one had paid her any attention. I looked at her and gave the smallest nod I could manage. She stepped toward the table. Her shoe caught the corner of the rug. The pitcher left her hands. Ice water cascaded across every document on the table, a wide, immediate, complete disaster. Ink ran in blue rivers through signature lines and paragraph breaks. Pages curled at their edges as the water spread. Nobody moved for 1 full second. Then Deanna was on her feet. You stupid girl. She crossed the room in 3 steps and struck Hadley across the face. Not a push, not a grab. A deliberate, open-handed blow that cracked through the dining room and sent Hadley stumbling into the wall. The room went absolutely still. I stood. The tremor in my hands disappeared. The confused expression I had been wearing for 3 days left my face. I was standing at my full height for the first time since they had walked through my door, and Deanna saw it. Whatever she saw in my face made her take a step backward. I forced myself to sit again. My water, I said quietly. Gerald gathered the soaked papers with the practiced calm of a man who has learned not to react to the things that happen in rooms like this one. He said he could return Saturday evening with clean copies and left before anyone spoke again. That was exactly the delay I needed, because by Saturday, Deanna would have nowhere left to stand. I looked at the ceiling for a moment after he left and asked Deanna for one thing before we proceeded. A housewarming party, I said, my voice sliding back into the uncertain register she expected. I have not had anyone over since I moved in. I would like my neighbors to see the house. One last nice evening before everything changes. Her expression tightened immediately. This is not the time for a party, Vernon. Gerald paused in the foyer. Actually, he said carefully, witnesses to a voluntary signing tend to make documents more durable. If neighbors see him in good spirits and signing willingly, it is much harder to challenge afterward. That changed her calculations. Within 20 minutes, Deanna was on the phone inviting couples from the surrounding waterfront community, a developer she had met at a charity event, and people whose names she had clearly been saving for exactly this kind of occasion. She told them it was a passing of the torch celebration, the moment when Raymond finally took stewardship of the family estate. I sat at the table and let her make every call. Then, with my hands beneath the table's edge, I sent Bo a message. Saturday, bring the boys. By noon on Saturday, the driveway held 2 catering vans and a florist's truck. Deanna moved through the house, giving orders and charging things to the credit card I had deliberately left on the counter. Flowers, 2 cases of champagne, a catered spread that approached $30,000 by the time she was finished. She was spending my money to celebrate stealing my money. I found that almost impressive. By early afternoon, Sandra had delivered everything she had assembled to the sheriff's office. The audio recordings from inside the house, Hadley's written statement, the sealed tea sample, Gerald Dunmore's connection to previous fraud cases, and the active warrant on Raymond. The deputies were not coming as a favor to me. They were coming because the evidence gave them legal cause. By 7 in the evening, luxury cars lined the street outside. Women in evening dresses stood near the waterfront windows while their husbands discussed real estate values, and Deanna moved among them, accepting congratulations she had not yet earned. I wore the charcoal suit I had bought for Carolyn's funeral. Just after 8, diesel engines rumbled at top of the driveway. 3 work trucks rolled slowly through the gate, their headlights sweeping across the front of the house. The front door opened, and Bo walked in with 8 men from my old crew. They wore work pants and boots and jackets still marked with concrete dust from that week's job. They carried themselves the way men carry themselves when they have worked with their hands long enough that they no longer feel the need to explain themselves to anyone. Deanna intercepted them before they reached the foyer. "Deliveries go around back," she said. "This is a private event." Bo removed his cap. "Vernon invited us. He has been confused. I am sorry, but you really need to leave." I stepped out of the gathering near the windows and stood at my full height. "They are my guests." The room grew quiet. Deanna looked at me. Something in my bearing told her that the man she had been managing all week had been replaced by someone she had not met yet. But she was not ready to accept that, so she did what she had always done. She escalated. She turned to the room. "You can see what I have been dealing with," she said, her voice warm with manufactured concern. "He invited workmen to a formal dinner. This is exactly why Raymond and I are stepping in." One of the men from my crew walked past her carrying a case of bottles. His jacket sleeve brushed her arm, and she recoiled. "Watch where you are going," she said, dropping her voice to something ugly. "Stay away from me, and do not touch anything." The laughter that had been filling the room went quiet. Several guests lowered their glasses. For the first time all evening, the people Deanna had invited to witness her victory were seeing the version of her she usually kept behind the warmth. I walked to the center of the room and tapped a fork against my glass until the remaining conversation died. "My daughter-in-law invited you here tonight to watch me sign over control of this house and everything in it," I said. "She described it as a responsible transition of family stewardship." Deanna went very still. "Before I sign anything, I want you to hear why she wants that control." I reached behind the arrangement of flowers on the mantel and picked up a remote. The lights in the room dimmed. A screen descended behind me. I heard Deanna exhale sharply. The video began. It was security camera footage from my kitchen, taken 3 days earlier. Deanna stood at the island with a glass of wine, speaking to Raymond in the easy, unguarded way people speak when they believe no one is watching. Once he signs, we transfer him to that memory care facility off the highway. Without proper management of his medications, a man his age typically declines within 6 months. The sound in the room changed. Someone near the back set down a glass on a hard surface. The footage changed. Now it was the hallway outside my study, Deanna's voice low and specific, Raymond standing behind her. We take control of the accounts first. The house transfers through the trust documents. Whatever is portable, we sell. The insurance pays out regardless. Raymond's voice. What if he figures it out? Deanna. Then I make sure his tea helps him stop worrying about it. A woman near the window said something too quiet to hear. The final clip began. Hadley crossing the dining room with the pitcher. The water spreading across the documents. Then the sound of a hand connecting with a 16-year-old girl's face, and Hadley striking the wall. Someone near the bar said, "My God." I stopped the video. Deanna stood in the center of the room. Champagne was spilling slowly from the glass tilted in her hand, soaking into my rug. Raymond leaned against the bar with his eyes closed. "You called me confused," I said. "You planned to sedate me, transfer my assets, and place me somewhere I would not cause complications. You told my son the process would take care of itself once I stopped resisting." I looked at Raymond. "And you stood in my hallway and said nothing." My son looked up from the bar for the first time. I held up the first folder. "I sold my company 2 years ago for $23 million. This house was purchased with cash on closing day. There is no frozen account, no bank loan, and no 6-day deadline. The call was arranged to see what you would do if you believed I was frightened and out of options." Deanna's mouth opened. The power of attorney documents, the guardianship petition, the trust, those were prepared for a confused old man who could be managed into surrendering his life. I am not that man. I set the folder down and picked up the second one. "Raymond, you have an active warrant in Mississippi for credit card fraud involving the personal information of elderly residents. Investigators in Tennessee and Alabama have connected you to similar cases. Your name and Deanna's both appear on fraudulent account applications." He slid slowly down the bar until he was sitting on the floor. "The $340,000 you owed to Salvatore Renteria's lending company was purchased last Tuesday through a trust I control. Renteria's company no longer holds any claim against you. I do." For a moment, Raymond looked at me with an expression I had not seen on his face since he was a boy. Something stripped of performance and pretense, something that was simply the face of a person who understands. Finally, how far they have fallen. "We were in over our heads," Deanna said. Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone, and so was the contempt. What remained was something flat and tired. "People were making threats. We did not know what else to do." "You crushed pills into tea," I said. "You made plans for what would happen when a 73-year-old man stopped resisting. You struck your daughter in front of witnesses because she spilled water." I looked at the people standing around the room. She did not spill it by accident. The kitchen doors opened behind Deanna. 2 sheriff's deputies walked in, and Sandra entered behind them with a folder under her arm. "The sheriff's office has received recordings, a minor's sworn statement, laboratory analysis of a tea sample, documentation of identity fraud across 3 states, and evidence of conspiracy to exploit an elderly person financially," Sandra said. "They also have a warrant for an active fraud case in Mississippi." Deanna looked around the room. She was searching for a friendly face, some expression of sympathy or disbelief that would give her something to work with. Nobody offered her anything. "This is a family matter," she said. "It became a criminal matter," I replied, "the moment you put something in my tea and struck Hadley in my house." I placed the last document on the table. "You have one decision to make tonight. Both of you sign your consent to temporary placement of Hadley in my care, while Sandra's emergency guardianship petition is reviewed by a judge. You agree not to contact her without court approval. Refuse, and the deputies will notify Child Protective Services before you reach the front door." Deanna's face twisted. She is my daughter. Then you should have protected her. Sandra slid the papers across the table. Raymond picked up the pen before Deanna could respond. His hand shook the entire time he signed. He did not look toward Hadley. You coward, Deanna said. Sign it, he said. She grabbed the pen and wrote her name so forcefully the paper tore at one corner. The deputies moved forward. Raymond stood and held his wrists out without being asked. Deanna pulled back, twisted, and had to be steadied by both officers as they walked her through the same front door she had entered 4 days earlier, believing my house was already hers. The room emptied quickly. Guests gathered their things and moved toward the exit with the quiet, focused efficiency of people who have witnessed something they would prefer to process at home. Within 20 minutes, the music had stopped, the caterers were packing, and the house was nearly silent. Bo sat at my kitchen counter, one boot up on the cabinet beneath him, and held out a beer. You all right, V? I took it, getting there. Hadley stood in the doorway of the dining room, with one hand pressed against the mark on her cheek. She had watched her parents escorted out without either of them looking back at her. She had watched that, and she was still standing. I crossed the room and crouched to her level. For a second, she stayed rigid. Then her arms came around my neck and she pressed her face into my shoulder. The tears came slowly, the way tears come when someone has been holding them in for a very long time. They left without looking at me, she whispered. They did not deserve to look at you, I said. Her fingers tightened on my jacket. Am I really staying with you? For as long as you want to stay. The legal process moved the way legal processes do, slowly, and with a great deal of paperwork. Gerald Dunmore did not escape the proceedings. Sandra reported him to the Florida bar, and investigators found messages confirming that Deanna had promised him a percentage of whatever they recovered from my estate. His license was suspended while prosecutors reviewed his involvement. Raymond accepted a plea agreement covering the Mississippi warrant, the fraudulent accounts in 2 other states, and his role in the scheme at my house. He received several years in custody and was ordered to make restitution to the elderly people whose identities he had stolen. Deanna refused every offer the prosecutors made until they introduced the recordings, Hadley's statement, the laboratory analysis of the tea, and the video of her striking her daughter in my dining room. She was convicted on assault charges, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of an elderly person, and related fraud counts. The court issued a protective order preventing any contact with Hadley. Neither of them received $1 from me. The court granted permanent guardianship several months after the emergency petition was approved. By the time the order came through, Hadley had already stopped asking whether someone might force her to leave. Biscuit was the name of a dog Deanna had sold the previous year when the money got tight. Hadley had mentioned it once, quietly, and I had filed it away. By the morning after the arrests, I was already making calls. Sandra's office helped trace the buyer. The family had moved and disconnected their number. By noon, we had reached a dead end. That afternoon, I took Hadley to the county shelter. We walked down the adoption wing until a beagle mix pressed his nose against the chain link and a nervous brown dog with one torn ear sat watching from the back of the same run. Hadley crouched down. Both dogs moved toward her at once. I said we would get 2, I reminded her. She laughed for the first time since she had arrived. We named them Biscuit and Hammer. That same week, I handed her a tape measure on the porch of an old cottage near the marina that my crew was restoring. She held the end wrong twice and wrote one number backward and apologized both times. Stop apologizing for learning, I told her. By sunset, sawdust was on her boots and both dogs were asleep in the back of my truck. She was exhausted in the way that comes from honest physical work, and on the drive home, she was not watching any of the cars behind us. She was watching the water. 3 years passed. Hadley graduated from high school on schedule and received an acceptance from the University of Florida's architecture program, which she had applied to without telling me until the letter arrived. During school breaks, she returned to Naples and worked alongside my restoration crew. Cypress beams, tin roofs, original plaster, the kind of structural work that requires patience and precision and respect for what was built before you arrived. The frightened girl who had once measured every exit in every room she entered eventually began directing workers twice her age, correcting their measurements without apology, and reading blueprints the way some people read maps, instinctively, three-dimensionally, always knowing where she was inside a structure. One Saturday afternoon, I found her standing alone inside a finished cottage near the marina, watching the way afternoon light moved across the new floorboards. She did not notice me for a moment. "Grandpa," she said when she did, "I think I want to keep building." I had been waiting for her to say something like that for 2 years. There is a belief, common enough that most people absorb it without examining it, that family is something blood guarantees. At 73, I understand that it is something people have to prove through choices made when proving it is inconvenient or costly. Bo and his crew showed up on a Saturday night because I asked them to, and because loyalty built over 22 years means something when it is tested. Sandra answered every call and pursued every avenue, and did not once suggest that perhaps this was more trouble than it was worth. And Hadley, at 16 years old, terrified and physically unwell and entirely dependent on parents who were planning to send her away, told me about the pills and the tea because she decided that protecting a grandfather she barely knew mattered more than protecting herself from her mother's anger. Those were acts of love. Raymond and Deanna shared my blood. They treated me like an account with a withdrawal limit. I do not take satisfaction in what happened to them. I accept that consequences arrived after years of choices. Deanna spent years treating every person in her life as a resource to be managed and extracted from. Raymond spent those same years choosing silence whenever truth would have cost him something. In the end, both of them had to live inside the life that those choices built. Hadley built something different. The house on the Gulf was no longer the place where I waited in the silence of a San whose family had left. It held sawdust on the kitchen floor most Saturdays, 2 dogs asleep under the table, a granddaughter who called when something went wrong at school, and also when something went right, and the particular kind of peace that arrives when a person finally stops bracing for the next loss. Carolyn's garden survived its second summer. Hadley replanted the section that had died, using a book she had ordered without mentioning it, and came home one afternoon to tell me that the original problem had been drainage rather than sunlight. I told her she sounded like an architect. She told me she was going to be one. I believed her. If this story found you in a moment when you needed to hear that patience is not weakness and silence is not surrender, leave me a comment below. Tell me what you would have done the morning they arrived with 9 suitcases. Would you have confronted them immediately, or done what I did, played the role they needed, and waited until every piece of evidence was already in place? And if you want more stories about betrayal, survival, and the kind of justice that arrives slowly and lands completely, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this one waiting for you.